My friends, this is Troy Brewer of Experiencing Real Life, heard every single day on Bible School Radio, 91.3 KDKR, Decatur, Dallas-Fort Worth, and on 91.3 KYJC Commerce.
Portions of KDKR's daily programming do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, what happens if the Supreme Court rules against student loan forgiveness? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, President Biden's showdown on student loan debt with the Supreme Court is imminent. What happens if it doesn't go through? Prudent Money contributor and college admissions expert John Hupalo is here to discuss. John, so good to have you on the program today.
Bob, great to be back with you. Good afternoon.
Let's start out at the very beginning because this has been a story that's been going on for a very long time. And let's just kind of go through just a real synopsis of what the whole debate is about.
Well, Bob, when you said a long time, I don't think you meant to take us back to 2015 when student loan forgiveness was first surfaced as a presidential campaign topic. I couldn't believe it when I was looking around this afternoon. But yeah, so this started like way back when 2015, and the far left wing of the Democratic Party at that point came around and said, "Hey, we've got this great issue. Students are at $1.3 trillion in debt. We've got to help them out." And so it just took hold and said the only way we can help students is to forgive their student loan debt. So for almost 10 years now, we've been hearing about this, and the big drum roll is going to come to an end most likely very soon. So the end of this month, on February 28th, the Supreme Court's going to hear two cases. And to answer your first question, like why is the Supreme Court even getting involved with this whole thing? We go back to the summer. President Biden said, "Look, we're going to forgive up to $20,000 of student loan debt." The political battle lines were drawn. 6 states, you won't be surprised, Bob, to hear that they were red states, banded together and said, well, wait a minute, the Biden administration can't do this. They're overstepping their authority. They don't have the ability to do this. And President Biden said, oh, no, you guys don't remember. The HEROES Act of 2003, again, 20-year-old law now, which was enacted because of 9/11. There was a provision in the HEROES Act that said, hey, by the way, the Department of Education can make changes to the student loan programs during national emergencies, which in 2001, 2003 were just on the heels of that whole thing. So the Biden administration very keenly said, well, guess what? We declared a national emergency around COVID. So the pandemic is the emergency, and we have the right then to step in and forgive all the student loan debt. So that's kind of the one set of conditions that the court's going to look at. Was that right? Can they use the HEROES Act to go and do this? There's a second suit, though, Bob, comes from a group called the Job Creators Network Foundation. You probably won't be surprised to hear that this is a conservative advocacy group. And they said that they have 2 plaintiffs who were deprived of their procedural rights because the public wasn't asked to comment about this new upcoming law, and both of these people were either partially or fully excluded from relief under the program. So therefore, it's not a broad program, and the court's going to rule on that. What we're seeing here, Bob, is the end game, the legal end game, frankly, for a very long political battle, which may not be over if the court rules favorably or unfavorably. Who knows what the next legal provisions will be. But at the end of the day, it's in the Supreme Court. It started way back in 2015. The Biden administration lit the fire in the summer last year with an actual program on the table. And as we talked about this in the past, Bob, the student loan borrowers are the ones sitting there saying, okay, what am I supposed to do?
Sure.
Should I pay? Should I not pay? Since 2020, they haven't had to pay on their student loans. There's been no interest accumulating. So they're just sitting there watching, and I guess they're going to make a whole bunch of popcorn at the end of the month to watch this very closely and see which way this is going to come out. But this will be very interesting.
So let's think about this for just a second. Could it be that you have a situation where, let's say that the Supreme Court says no on both accounts, and then could the administration once again file another lawsuit that ends up at the Supreme Court, and this could go on and on for at least until the election cycle's over? So in other words, your student loan payments are going to be stalled maybe for another year and a half.
Yeah, keep kicking the can down the road. So what will likely happen is if the Biden administration is not successful and the court says, no, your student loan forgiveness plan is no good, these borrowers have to start paying, what will happen then is that likely the president will go back and say, okay, you know what, the HEROES Act, we tried that. I might have some authority somewhere else, like in the Higher Education Act of 1965, where it says that there are some other provisions in there that maybe the president can act under without the congressional consent. So they may try to pull that card out next. It's really hard to say with any kind of certainty what's going to happen. Who knows how the court will rule? But more importantly, who knows when the repayments will start? By the way, Bob, if the court rules and says, okay, the Biden administration can go forward with this program, then the repayments will start the 60 days after that ruling is made. So the borrowers will have to do that. If the court doesn't rule, the borrowers are supposed to start repaying again on June 30th. So it's whichever of those dates comes first, 60 days after the litigation is resolved or June 30th. So again, there's no real certainty to any of this, just a lot of speculation about what might happen.
Well, according to a CNBC article, and I thought this was interesting, there are three consequences to this not going the way of President Biden and student loan debt holders. The first one is an obvious one that you could debate, which is massive defaults. And I got to thinking about that. And on one hand, it makes total sense that this could be massive defaults, or is this just an overblown threat? Well, I mean, what do you really think could happen? I mean, this is really in a lot of ways very unprecedented when you look at the size and scope of people who have student loan debts, and if you look at the amount of time that has passed since they made their last payment, and then what has happened with inflation. It's not as if people are in better shape today than they were before all this went down. What do you've looked at this and thought about it and talked about it for a long time. What do you think would be the result in regards to massive defaults?
Yeah, Bob, you and I are thinking along the same line on this, quite honestly. So there is a little bit of a precedent. In the past, for like natural disasters and the like, there have been times when they'll say, okay, for 6 months or 8 months or a year, people in this particular region, because there was a hurricane or whatever it was, they're not going to have to pay on their student loans. And the reality is, once those repayments started again, there were massive defaults, very large defaults. And I start thinking about that and say, well, is that the same here? So I look at like where we are, and the unemployment rate is low right now, right? People have jobs. If you want a job, you can get a job. There are these income payment contingency plans, repayments. So it says that you don't have to pay more than X percent of your salary. So even if you're making a little bit, you might not have to pay anything or pay very little. So there are programs in place. So I when I read all these what I call them the scare tactic articles, massive defaults, and they're going to do all of this, I start to look under a little bit and say, I don't think I can agree with that. I think that borrowers can take advantage of existing programs, and they most likely have jobs. They've been out of school, some of them now 2-3 years without making any payments. Not great that they've been conditioned to think, oh, I don't have to pay, so it's not in their psyche that they have to write that check or have that direct deposit over to the government every month. But I think they probably have the money and the wherewithal to do it. So I think it's more of a scare tactic than probably a reality. Not to mention the fact, if you default on your student loan, it's really bad for you in a lot of ways, and people will kind of react to that very quickly, I think.
Yeah, we've got about a minute and a half before break. Talk a little bit about, just as a reminder, what does happen if a loan goes into default.
Yeah, quickly, it's terrible, right? So this is what happens. The student loan, and by the way, a default is 270 days after the payment was due. So it's not 30 days or 60 days. So you've been not paying for 2/3 of a year, basically, right? So this is all 3/4 of a year. This is an awful lot of time has passed. So the student loan services sends you a note that says, by the way, we're going to default your loan next month. If you let us default your loan, we're going to report you to the credit agencies. And what that means is that your credit score is going to go down. If you want to go borrow for a car or for a house or whatever, you're going to have a hard time doing that. And the second thing we're going to do is turn you over to a collection agency. So all these folks are going to start ringing your doorbell and making these calls, and we're going to get our money because at the end of the day, student loans are non-dischargeable in bankruptcy, so that's a problem. You can't get rid of them if you have a bankruptcy. So there are some pretty heavy hammers that can come down on folks, and I think that the government and others will employ those if they need to.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thanks so much for joining me today. John Apollo is here with me today. We're talking about what's going on with student loan debt, and as the saga continues, and in the Supreme Court. In fact, I would think you said February 28th is when the date is, right? The court date?
That's correct, Bob. They're going to have the oral arguments that day.
So we probably won't have a whole lot to report back to you next time because John always comes on the first Wednesday of each month. But we'll keep you posted as to what you need to know because there are a lot of things at stake here. Hey, this is Bob Brooks. We're up against a break. Stick around. I'll be right back. Hi, this is Bob Brooks, host of the Prudent Money Radio Show. Well, over the past 3 years, we have seen it all, from COVID to inflation to a bear market in stocks and bonds. Well, what happens in 2023? Well, on Saturday, February the 4th at 10 a.m., we are going to address 2023 and your money and talk about the following. Inflation, will it go higher or go away for good? A look at real estate in 2023. Are we heading for a recession? Will the stock and bond markets turn around? What is the best place to keep cash and emergency money? What could be the best kept secret of the next rebound? What steps do you take in 2023? Tough questions, real answers. Let's have a discussion. Well, on Saturday, February the 4th at 10 a.m., join me in a live Zoom presentation where we will discuss what you need to know to be safe and profitable in 2023. For more information and to sign up, go to prudentmoney.com.
This week on Truth for Life, join Alistair Begg as he turns to the pages of Scripture to answer long-standing debates about baptism. You'll also learn how to witness by the way you worship and discover what effective church leadership looks like. Listen to Truth for Life with Alistair Begg.
Weekdays at 5:30 a.m. here on 91.3 KDKR.
Dr. Charles Stanley. If you want life at its best, it's a road you travel, following Jesus Christ, Savior, Lord, Master, and God. And that all begins with you acknowledging your sinfulness and asking Him to forgive you of your sins.
In Touch with Dr. Charles Stanley, helping you grow in Christ every day.
Listen daily at 12:30 on Bible School Radio 91.3.
Welcome back. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. My special guest today is John Apollo. We're talking about student loan debt and what's about to happen in the Supreme Court as they try to figure out what the next move is going to be. Will it be forgiveness or not? Now, what's interesting, I don't know that I've ever heard you say that you have 270 days before they actually default. I mean, that's a significant amount of time to figure the problem out. So I'm assuming that if you're in a situation where you're in that 270-day period, as long as you bring everything current, that then it's okay.
Yeah, it's not a default. That's exactly it, Bob. The time period is long to help borrowers get their arms around whatever their situation is. We've talked about this many times in the past. The reality is, if a student is having a problem making a payment, the first thing they should do is call the student loan servicer and say, "I've got this situation. What can I do?" Right, and then they can try to find a way to work through it. Most of the folks who put their head in the sand and just think, 270 days will pass and it'll all go away, it just gets worse. And here's the real problem when we talk about how compound interest works. Finance guys like you and I, we talk about this a lot. So I default on my loan today. The interest continues to pile up for 270 days, right? I still owe that money. It's not as if it's free. And so you hear these stories of defaulters who say, "I don't understand. I started out with a loan that was $10,000, and then after my default, I owe $12,000 or $13,000, whatever the numbers are." Well, yeah, it's because all that interest was compounding on the unpaid principal, and they just keep adding that on. So you're not going to escape this. And so my best advice always, and maybe you hear a little frustration in my voice because it just seems so obvious, if you're having a problem, call the student loan servicer and try and work it out, because this is not going to go away. The headache's just going to get bigger and bigger as you go along. So there are a lot of programs now, and the Congress has tried to address this as best they can. They have 8 or 9 different loan repayment programs based on specific circumstances. Do your best to try to work it out. Student loan default is not going to help you.
And I would also think that given the circumstances that we're under at this point, that they're going to be a whole lot more lenient and helpful to get things back on track per individual.
Yeah, I think the reality is the federal government prescribes. They tell the student loan servicers, here's the flexibility you have. All these different programs. Somebody calls and they need help, put them in one of these programs. So there are opportunities, and I think you're right. They're going to want to get folks back on track. And the more I think about this, we raised it before about massive defaults. I don't see how smart college graduates are going to default on that with all the opportunities they have. The real problem, which is always the problem in student loans, it's not the graduate that has the issue. It's the student who went to school for a little bit, dropped out, didn't get the benefit of school, and now they have a $5,000 or a $10,000 loan, which, again, is why Biden said, you know what, and he knows, they've done their homework. Something on the order of 2/3 of all student loan defaults occur at balances under $10,000. So when they did this $10,000, they just didn't pull that out of the air. They did a calculation that said of all of the defaulters, something on the order of like 80% of all those defaulters will have their balances wiped out if the student loan forgiveness is $10,000 or $20,000 if you had that Pell Grant. So they've done the math. It's $500 billion worth of debt that's going to go away, and they are going to help a lot of those students who didn't complete, who thought they were going to have the benefit of a college education, didn't get it, and now are holding this debt. So there are both sides to that coin, and I'm really hopeful that there'll be some resolution so we can move on and talk about something else in another 6 or 8 months from now.
I want to go back to something that you said, because I don't want anybody to miss this, because it was kind of an eye opener for me. If I heard you right, did I hear you say that that they don't report to the credit reporting agency until the default has actually happened? So they're not reporting that you're late. Is that correct, or is that wrong?
Oh, that's a really good question, if they're reporting the delinquency. I don't know that for sure, Bob. I believe that they do report the delinquencies as they occur, so at 30, 60, 90 days. But the defaults, which is the really huge mark, when you default on your credit, that stays on your record for 7 years. those delinquencies, they kind of come off, much quicker. So I do believe they report those delinquencies as they're going along, but the default is at 270 days.
Well, the bottom line is you've got, and I don't think that I ever knew that you had 270 days. That's why I want to make sure and stop and make sure everybody heard that, because that does change the context of the question. I mean, you've got that's almost 9 months. Right?
That's right.
Yeah, so that you've got to take care of that. That certainly you could come up with some kind of solution to avoid default. Now, to take it a step further, if they turn that over to debt collectors, there's the harassment, there's the mark on your credit report, there's all that. But at the end of the day, the only way that this can be resolved is through legal means. And that's just a big mess.
Yeah, you really don't want to go there. As I said before, I use that fancy term, non-dischargeable in bankruptcy, means you can't discharge it. You can't get rid of it, right?
Right.
The only way you can actually get rid of it is go to a court and have a judge say, oh, this borrower has this very severe economic hardship and they're not going to be able to repay, so we're just going to let that debt be discharged. The courts, the bankruptcy courts, do not do that lightly. So some folks will say, well, at the end of the day, I'll just go to court. And the precedents are mostly against the borrowers. You really need to have severe economic hardship and prove it in a court, which, again, as you say, it's time, it's process, it's money. There's not a good legal remedy to this.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. I'm talking to John Upalo, and if you'd like more information on John and some great resources, go to mycollegecorner.com. There's obviously a second consequence to this, and I think that this is a real consequence that President Biden would face as political fallout. I mean, how important do you think this is going to be to his reelection campaign? Because this is something very easy to make into a big drama.
Oh yeah, no question about that, Bob. I'm sure even the timing of when that program was announced last year, just before the midterm elections, it was August. It was definitely time to help politically. So yeah, there's no question that there will be fallout for the president, maybe some of the Democrats who are on that side. I mean, you can just see how this lines up. Your point earlier about this massive default. Where do quotes like that come from? I know that one of the undersecretaries of education used a term very similar to that recently in a speech, that they were expecting massive defaults if this were to happen. Well, maybe that happens, maybe not. But again, it's supercharged politically. It has been since 2015. So there's no reason to think it won't be today.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. If you want more information about John, go to mycollegecorner.com, and John's got tons of resources and information there. John, always good to talk to you. Talk to you next month.
Bob, look forward to it. Good luck with your seminar this weekend. It sounds fantastic.
Hey, thank you.
Be well. Thank you.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Hey, I just want to take a second here towards the end of the program to make sure that, as John was talking about the seminar, the webinar that's going to be this weekend, and been looking over the information, what I'm going to be talking about. And I think this is extremely important to, of course I think this because I'm doing it. I realize that. But I do think, and I'm doing it because I think it's extremely important that you get up the curve on what spells risk for your investments, for your money in 2023. I mean, think about it. We've had a significant issue come up in the past one a year for the past 3 years. We've had COVID, we've had inflation, we've had a bear market in stocks and bonds that has started. And there's just a lot of information that you need to get up the curve on, especially things like what will inflation look like this year? How could this inflation this time be different than in periods of inflation in the past? I mean, I think it's extremely important because most of your media is just going to be going off of past data, and I think it's a lot more complicated than that. The bear market in stocks and bonds, very unusual that both asset classes would be having the problems they're having. And of course, the first month of the year has been really good, but will that continue? And talking about the potential recession and what that looks like, there's a lot of really big topics. And here's another thing that I'm going to be talking about. What if the employment numbers are nowhere near what they say they are? And I've got a set of statistics that the media did not even remotely, a miscalculation, a huge miscalculation that the media does not even jump on and talk about. So I think that there's a lot of things that you need to know and understand about what's happening. And all you have to do is, it's going to be about 45, 50 minutes. I'm going to take questions at the end as long as you want to ask questions. It's in the comfort of your own home. I won't be there, but it will be there through webinar. So that's this Saturday, 2 days from now at 10 a.m., and go to prudentmoney.com to sign up. Hey, this is Bob Brooks. You got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time. Keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.